Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hey, and welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. I'm Kevin Rosenquist. Thanks for being here. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law, personal injury lawyers, and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. Welcome, Sagi. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
All right. So what are my rights if I'm injured in a trucking accident caused by a negligent driver in Florida?
It's a great question. So you have several rights that you need to know. Number one, you have a right to get full compensation for your case. Number two, you have a right to speak to an attorney. You don't have to take the offer the insurance company gives you, because a lot of times they'll get on the phone with the injured person right away in hopes of paying them some quick money. It sounds like a lot of money. They want to lock them down. They know people are desperate and get them to sign a release. You don't have to sign a release. Speak to a lawyer. That's your main right. Get a lawyer so the lawyer can preserve the evidence and represent you properly. So your main right, number one, I would say, is you don't have to settle the case right away. These cases, to get full compensation, do take time. Insurance companies don't do the right thing. They put you to task, or their lawyer, they put a lawyer representing the person to task. What I mean by that is they'll make you go file a lawsuit, go through the rigor of a trial, and then potentially pay you. Now, a lot of times they'll settle before, if they know who the lawyer is and the lawyer's been tested in trial and has a proven track record. So that's why it makes a difference what lawyer you choose. And in terms of the right, you have a right to get treatment. If you're hurt, you have a right to get treatment. You have a right to look into the future and see what kind of treatment you'll need. So don't just settle right away for the first offer they give you. This is their game plan, to get the claims off their books. So they want to get these cases settled before a lawyer gets involved, because when a lawyer that knows what they're doing gets involved, the value of the case completely changes.
Can I sue the truck driver and the trucking company simultaneously?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, can you sue the truck driver and the trucking company? You actually have to. If you're going to bring the lawsuit, you have to bring in both parties at the same time. And so a lot of times you'll see it's either the truck driver's negligence and then the trucking company, because they employ the truck driver. So if I'm the company and I employ the driver, I'm responsible. So it's my job as a company to ensure that that driver is qualified, has been tested, has a clean driving record, because the last thing you want to do if you're a company is put a driver on the road that has had a bunch of accidents. Or, for example, what if the driver has sleep apnea? Do you ever bother to question the driver on their conditions? Some drivers have sleep apnea. And as you know, if they're not sleeping, there's only so much you can do when you don't sleep for a long time. You start falling. Everyone's have that, where they're snoozing while they're driving. That could happen, but it's more dangerous. It's dangerous when you're driving, but it's even more dangerous when you add to the mix of an 80,000-pound piece of machinery driving on the highway and the person's falling asleep. You know, it can be in the roadway. They could fall asleep. We just got a case literally last week where a person's walking on the sidewalk and an 18-wheeler just jumps on the sidewalk, runs the guy over. Poor guy went to the hospital, had a bad leg injury, and they had to amputate his leg.
I can't believe he's alive.
Yeah. And maybe what we'll do is on one of our episodes, we'll show the video, because the guy's alive. He's in a bad brain injury, and he had his leg amputated. And that's not something that should ever happen, right? And I can bet you that didn't happen because, and we're still getting into the weeds of the case, but that's not happening because someone's, sleeping well. That's because someone's tired. They're not paying attention to the road. And, when you're tired, your reflexes are off, your perception is off, your reaction time is off. And who knows what he was thinking when he drove onto the sidewalk, and then ran over the pedestrian on the sidewalk. This wasn't in the street. So obviously this is clearly the trucking company's fault, and they're going to want to do everything possible to minimize that and try to settle that with the company. But that's obviously a huge case, and there's a lot to do on that case because it's not just the trucking company. You have the broker company there as well. They're agents of the trucking company. They brokered the deal. What knowledge did they have when they hired the trucking company? Because there's scores. The federal government keeps scores on each of these trucking companies. And so there's a company called SafeAssist. So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, they have a website, and they keep a score on each and every trucking company out there. So if I'm a broker, for example, and I want to broker a shipment from point A to point B, what I'll do is I'll hire different trucking companies. And what am I doing as a broker to ensure that this trucking company is safe as opposed to another trucking company? Or am I just taking the cheapest approach because it's all about the bottom line as opposed to, hey, there's people on the roadway, there's people on sidewalks, there's people sitting on bus benches. Had that case too, where they're sitting on a bus bench and a truck just smashes into them. These things happen because you either have truck drivers, and I'm not saying all truck drivers are bad or all trucking companies are bad, but there are truck drivers who fall asleep, there are truck drivers who use drugs, and all this can affect the way you drive. That one, nobody has to be a genius to know that, right? Drugs and driving just don't work together.
And you brought up the thing about fatigue too, because we've all been in a situation where we're driving and you're kind of like holding your eyes open because you're tired or whatever. You're trying to like turn your AC on or do something, but it's worse if you drive for a living because you just get more used to it and you feel like you can function better in doing your job while you're maybe not at your best.
Right. And they're pushing the limit.
Right.
That's why they're supposed to keep driver logs. It used to be they used to keep them paper. So you'd have the driver keeping 3 sets of logs, one for themselves, one for their company, and then one for the federal regulators. So you'll see them on I-95 where they go to the weigh stations when you're driving, they weigh them in, or when they get pulled over by the police, they'll want to see their driver logs. So if their driver's logs show that they're over, they would get pulled over and they wouldn't be able to drive anymore. So they had 3 sets. We've had cases where they had 3 sets of books, of log books. Now they do it electronically, so you wouldn't see 3 sets. I'm sure there's a way to game that system too. We haven't found that out yet, but I'm sure there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. Someone's going to game it so they can get more hours on the road. More hours on the road means they can make more money. Trucking company makes more money, and it's always about the bottom line instead of safety, safety, safety. It always starts with safety. When they design something, whatever it is, the architects, they're always talking about safety first, and then we'll do everything else, not bottom line first. With the trucking company and industry, especially with insurance companies, it's always the bottom line first and then everything else. Then safety is like, I'll put on the back burner.
What are my rights regarding accessing accident scene evidence and records? Am I able to, what can I do there?
Accessing the evidence or the documentary evidence, whether it's photographs, videos, inspections of the trucks, which are important as well, because there's keys to inspections that you just wouldn't see in just pictures. So what we like to do is speak about your rights. We like to, number one, get to the scene, photograph the entire scene, look for skid marks, look for scuff marks. We like to have our investigator out there speak to witnesses. If there's witnesses, sometimes it happens at an intersection. That case we spoke about earlier where the witness, the police report had it wrong, where the individual was on the sidewalk. The police report had it wrong. They had him in the street, the police report, because the police couldn't get any information from the pedestrian. It wasn't until the investigator went across the street to, in that case, it was a club, pulled the video from the club, and you can see that the person was on the sidewalk, not on the street. So you had the truck driver who lied to the police about how it happened. But the video, if a picture's 1,000 words, a video speaks 10,000 words because the video clearly showed him on the sidewalk. So you have the right to get that evidence. Now, the problem is the person who's the victim, they don't know what evidence they need. And sometimes they're too hurt to go get the evidence. So you need to hire someone like a trucking accident firm who knows what they're doing, who's focused on and these types of cases, who's had these types of cases. So we'll get photographs, get witness statements, go to the local establishments in the area, pull video, because the police, not because it's their fault, but sometimes they don't get it right. And sometimes it is their fault they don't get it right. In this case, the truck driver lied. right, to the police, and the video shows something different. So you have the video. Then you have the electronic data recorder, the black box. We can double check the black box. Then you can do, what if the vehicle had something wrong with it? The truck driver claims, hey, the vehicle just didn't allow me to stop. Maybe the brakes were bad. We need to get the brakes inspected. This is something that we need to have experts on board for. And all these types of things, whether the load was too heavy. Sometimes you have a truck that the load was not properly stored right, and then the truck rolls. That's another way to look at the case. But if an individual tries to do this on their own, there's just too much information, and it's very costly to hire these experts. So most people don't know how to do that on their own. I would say 99% of people don't know how to do that on their own. In fact, probably 99% of lawyers don't know what they're doing when it comes to trucks. It's a different animal. So if you're dealing with a lawyer who just handles car accident cases, they may not handle specifically, exclusively truck accidents. And that makes a difference on, do you have your team in place? Are you ready to go to the scene? And so that's why I say to any clients, if you're making a decision, whoever you decide, make sure you make the right decision, but do it right away, because that evidence disappears daily, especially if you have videos. Like if the investigator didn't go to that scene, to that club, and pull that video, we would have had a truck driver statement versus a person who can't make a statement because he doesn't even remember what happened. He was so badly injured.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I imagine the person that got hit didn't really know exactly how it all went down because they're so rattled and shaken, and obviously brain injuries and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes sense. What types of damages can I claim after a trucking accident?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the damages that a person can claim after a trucking accident will, it depends on state by state. Every state is different, but most states allow for what's called pain and suffering. And those are two different things. Pain is one thing. Suffering is another thing. You can claim mental anguish. So your mental pain and suffering is different from physical pain and suffering. So you would have depression. People have that, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorders. You see that. You have traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries. So you can claim there's all types of injuries. Now, obviously, the person has to have the injuries to make those claims. You don't want to just make a claim if there's nothing there.
Just put the neck thing on. Just put the neck thing on and hope for the best. Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't go too well. You have fatalities as well. I mean, unfortunately, it happens. Like I told you earlier, about 4,000 people a year die from trucking-related accidents. So those things are also compensable. And every state has different laws in place. So some states have what's called a cap in place, meaning you can't get over a certain amount of money for your pain and suffering, which I think is absolutely crazy and ridiculous. It's not fair. Why should someone in one state be able to get fair compensation where another state, the legislature has says that $1 million is all a person can get, no matter how badly injured they are, or $750,000 or $500,000. It's not fair that a trucking company can come in and destroy someone's life, and they get the protections of what the legislator thought was a good amount of money, because it didn't affect that legislative person, but it affected someone else's family. It doesn't matter. But when it affects them, they don't like the law. There was actually a case like that where, I don't remember what state it was in, the person had pushed for medical malpractice reform and caps, and we need to put a cap on damages because these verdicts are out of control. And sure enough, he was able to push the state legislative to put caps on damages where you couldn't get a certain amount of money. And lo and behold, 2 years later, who was a victim of medical malpractice? This same person. But now he thought that the caps were unconstitutional. It's not fair because it affected him personally, right? So now he's trying to move to undo all those caps. But so that also applies in certain states. Now, thankfully in Florida, we don't have caps on damages.
So what rights do I have if the trucking company offers me a settlement? So if they try to pay me off before I get a chance to talk to anybody, what are my rights in that situation?
Yeah, so a lot of times the trucking companies will come and try to, settle the case before you get a lawyer. You can tell them, no, I don't want to settle the case. And the reason what I would say is no, if you have injuries. Obviously, if you don't have injuries and they're throwing you money, take the money. But if you have injuries, you want to find out what the long-term nature of those injuries are. So a lot of times you have people, for example, you get a concussion and people are back right away and they think they're working and everything, and there's no ramifications. Concussions is another word of saying a brain injury. Once the brain is impacted, it just never goes back to the same. So when you have a concussion, you really need to get that explored and looked at, because it'll be years down the road where you start having issues. You see that a lot with the football players or boxers or people who get head trauma. It's years down the road where they start seeing the problems, the anger issues, the post-traumatic stress disorder. They're a completely different person. A lot of my clients, after they've had concussions, their family members will tell me that this is a new human being. This isn't the human being that I know. They've had a brain injury. They're completely different. It's a different person. We have one right now with a child where the child was normal acting, right? What is normal acting? But just like every other child, and then suddenly gets into
I have a 3-year-old. No such thing as normal.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever other 3-year-olds are doing.
Yeah.
And then you have, and this is a 6-year-old. Now you have, after this collision, you have a child who's completely different. They're acting angry. They're fighting where they weren't. Months earlier, they weren't like that. And the year before they weren't like that. But suddenly they're acting out because their brain's been injured. The little delicate creature that a child is, having their brain impact. You see that with the shaken baby syndrome. You don't see that the baby looks fine. It's years later where they discover the brain damage. So I would say if an adjuster comes up to you and tries to settle the case and you've had a concussion or a brain injury or any other type of injury, before you settle that case, make sure that you look at the long-term nature of those injuries. You can't just think for today. You have to think for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, because you don't know. And without getting the right medical experts involved to determine what those issues will be, some doctors who have seen people for 20, 30 years, who know what can happen, especially neurologists, life care planners, physiatrists, where they see and they deal with people's pain and how long lasting it is, how chronic it is. That's important. So don't rush to settle. You don't have to settle. Don't sign those documents. Don't deposit that money. If you deposit that check, it's like game over. If you sign that release, it's game over. You don't have a right to go back and reopen that claim. That's why it's important and imperative that you seek representation, a lawyer that knows what they're doing in the trucking world. It's not a regular car crash.
It seems to be the theme. It is different. It's different than a regular car crash. So I know I've dealt with insurance companies before. They're not always the most cooperative, companies that you could ever deal with. What should I do if my insurance company is just not cooperating with my claim?
Right. If your insurance company is not cooperating with your claim, or you feel you're being pushed around, because it is overwhelming. For a lawyer like me, it's not overwhelming, and I'll tell you why. I deal with it every day, just like someone who deals in their business every day. Whatever it is they're doing, to them it's natural, like sort of walking for us, right? If you know how to walk and you walk, it's natural. This is what we do on a daily basis. So for us, it's not an aggravation. But for the average person who hasn't had a claim before and hasn't dealt with trucking companies and their insurance companies, it can boggle them down with paperwork and a lot of items that, again, all that paperwork they want you to complete, they're trying to trip you up. They're trying to lock you down in certain statements, certain things you're going to say that are going to hurt your case later on. And when I say later on, it means maybe in a settlement conference at mediation where they bring up something that you said and throw it in your face, or say that's why we're not paying you, or, in a trial where you had filled out a form without a lawyer being present, and who knows what you said. And they'll blow that up the size of a huge, poster board or billboard and say, look what you signed, look what you said. And of course, you didn't have the protections of a lawyer to know what to say. I'm not telling people to make up stuff, but there's things that a lawyer will protect you from saying. Again, without evidence, you don't want to say stuff. You need to have a lawyer prepare you, just like the defense has their drivers being prepared. Their drivers are speaking to experts before anybody speaks to them. We have a right to talk to our client, and you have a right to see a lawyer. So don't rush into settling the claim. Don't rush into signing. You have the right not to sign documents, not to sign releases. And you have a right to ask that adjuster, why are you offering me this money? What's the basis for this offer? Why are you not offering more money? Tell me your basis. And the adjuster has a code of ethics that they have to follow. Whether they follow them or not, that's a different question. The code of ethics and the law requires them to, but does everybody follow the law? No. And unfortunately, that's why we need lawyers, because the insurance companies are not just going to voluntarily pay you and, do the right thing. They don't. And that's why if they did, you wouldn't need lawyers. We wouldn't need adjusters. They would just pay everybody what, the fair value of the claim is. But again, what's a fair value of the claim to lawyer A would be completely different to lawyer B. Some lawyers, again, they have an advertising budget. They got to meet their budget, and they will undersettle a case just because they need to meet their what's called the monthly nut or the monthly expenses. And they just need to do that. We don't do that. I don't care if the case takes years to settle. I know clients want to settle their cases quick, but if it takes years to get to trial, we'll do it and get you justice. So don't just go to any lawyer. Make sure your lawyer can withstand the test of time and get you fair compensation and justice for what you went through. So don't just sign documents. Don't rely on everything the insurance company tells you. Make sure you get the entire amount of insurance disclosed to you. So that's the law. They have to give you the amount of insurance you're entitled to know. Don't settle a case without it.
Once again, great advice. Appreciate it. Well, thanks for tuning in to Road to Recovery, advocacy and insights for trucking accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com. That's SHAKED law.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Sagi, great to see you as always. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.